disruptive.
America that I fought for.
Weird thing to happen.
So of course, it comes to no surprise that Mark Carney is continuing his tirade for a net zero economy, which we know that net zero is a precursor to what it actually is involving, which is central digital currency, involving digital IDs, involving a total transformation of the country or culture or society. And that's not even me stating that. That's, from his own book, his own publications, which is kind of like a manifesto of how he's going to govern. That's what he wants for Canada. That this net zero agenda has little to do with the environment and more just about the sinister control to manipulate certain industries, manipulate the culture, the society of Canadians into his whirlwind of, globalization and neoliberalism. So, as the CBC is pointing out, Carney government non-committal about Canada beating 2030 climate goals. Canada previously adopted legal requirement to achieve net zero by 2050. Legal requirement. By who? Who's enforcing this? Like, what law agency or law enforcement is putting this standard onto Canada that we're going to achieve net zero by 2050, which is physically impossible, by the way. Physically impossible. That they claim that they want to capture carbon enough to have zero emissions in the country of Canada, which is physically impossible. We are carbon beings. We produce emissions. That we need emissions. We need carbon and carbon dioxide in order to survive. So net zero is a complete lie that Mark Carney even knows. But he's still going to push it because of the WEF, because of Brookfield, because of all these different NGOs and agencies and private equity firms that he's a part of. He's the billionaire central banker that came into Canada at the right nick of time to be selected to be prime minister. So Prime Minister Mark Carney and his environment minister aren't saying whether Canada is still committed to meeting its climate goals under the Paris Agreement by 2030, as the government faces criticism over his emissions reductions plan. In an email to the Canadian press on Monday, the Office of the Environment Minister, Julie Dasprin, said Canada is committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, but would not commit to the 2030 target when asked directly. Taking into account the evolving global and economic context, the federal government will provide an update on its emissions reductions plan as we strive towards our 2030 and 2035 targets. Dasprinson Press Secretary Keenan Nebhard wrote. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names. Building climate resilience and meeting our targets is not optional. It's economically smart, fiscal, responsible, and essential to protecting Canadians and all the places they call home. Really? It's protecting us. It's protecting Canadians. That, instead of planting trees, instead of, caring and being there for the natural order of things, that we're going to take the tax money, we're going to charge you extra for groceries, for gas, for, the essentials of, maintaining society. We're going to tax you through a carbon tax. Take that money and build these monstrosities that are going to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere. There's already a method to do that. It's called trees. It's called plants. It's called photosynthesis. That's basic biology. And yet they're going to take the money to build these giant monstrosities that are going to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere, prevent us from having a national energy reserve, and diminish our economy with doing this. Canada has a legal requirement to achieve net zero by 2050, having included the target in legislation in 2021. Part of its path to get there is a plan to cut emissions to at least 40% below 2005 levels by 2030, a commitment set out in the Paris Agreement. The statement from Desperson's office was the third time on Monday a member of Carney's government declined to comment to the Paris target. Earlier Monday, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly also sidestepped a question about whether the government is committed to its 2030 target, deferring instead to Desperson for comment. We want to make sure we find ways to be net zero by 2050, Joly said. Carney in St. John's on Monday to announce tariff relief measures for Atlantic Canada businesses was asked by reporters on how government is planning to adjust its climate targets after recent policy announcements dialed back some of the Trudeau government climate initiatives. You have to look this case by case because, when they say that, they're probably going to refer to like, oh, Carney, slashed the carbon tax. But what they don't tell you is that, no, Carney just rebranded the carbon tax. So instead of you paying it directly up front, he then took that carbon tax, put it onto the industries, and then the industries are going to charge you that tax. So you're still paying for the carbon tax. It's just not upfront and honest about it. That's what Mark Carney did. He took the carbon tax away from you, put it to companies and corporations, and then those companies and corporations then charge you to pay for it. So you're not eliminating the carbon tax whatsoever. On his first day in office in March, Carney eliminated the consumer carbon price. There you go. On Friday, he delayed the electric vehicle sales mandate for at least a year. Carney has said he has plans to strengthen the industrial carbon pricing system, but has yet to explain how. And that's why you are paying the burden and why carbon taxes did not go away. They did not go away. They took it out of sight from you and put it onto industries and corporations that are charging you for it. That's why gas is still unbelievably high. That's why groceries are expensive. That's why everything, just heating your home, electricity, has become rampantly expensive. But Carney took away the carbon tax, so I think it should be cheaper, right? He didn't take it away. He didn't axe it out. He didn't eliminate it. He just rebranded it. That's all it is. Carney did not directly answer to the question about Canada's climate targets and instead pivoted to the competitive advantages of a low-carbon economy. We are becoming low-carbon in any industry as being a key driver of competitiveness, Carney said, adding he would have more to share in the coming weeks. So that we can focus on what we can do in order to drive emissions down in a way that makes the country more competitive is crucial. He pointed to offshore oil and gas as a low-carbon alternative to conventional extraction and suggested his government's push to double housing construction over the next decade will lead to more energy-efficient homes. And all of that will get our emissions down and make us more competitive. So that's the focus of the government, Carney said, without addressing how these lower emissions would compare to Canada's targets. The government is focused on results. And again, this is coming from Mark Carney, who prior to being prime minister has assets through Brookfield, has investments through Brookfield, to foreign oil reserves, to coal plants, to all these fossil fuel outlets outside of Canada. Even him describing the fact that we're doing offshore drilling. We're doing it offshore. So you're telling me that Alberta, we can't do drilling in Alberta. We got cut on the carbon. from transporting Alberta crude oil across the country that would make energy more affordable if we had a national standard on our energy sector. Instead of doing that, you're putting the money to offshore drilling, putting it away from Canada. It's so insidious. It's so insidious that this is the planning to govern Canada. Oh, we're making it as net zero as possible by still doing the exact same extractions just away from Canada. While the government has yet to say whether it will miss its 2030 target or whether it's still trying to achieve it, observers raised doubts about the target even before Carney dialed back carbon pricing and electric vehicle policies. A report last year from the federal government commissioner said Canada was not on track to meet its 2030 target. Gary DeMarco estimated Canada's emissions had only dropped 7% below 2005 levels. After Carney delayed the electric vehicle mandate, Green Party leader Elizabeth May questioned his climate intentions. Carney's first 100 days shows us clearly that he is rolling back on climate action at every turn. I should do this in a drunk voice. It's Elizabeth May. Scrapping the carbon price, dismantling legislation, canceling the EV mandate. These are not the decisions of a leader serious about the climate emergency. That's how you doing, Elizabeth May. That's how you doing, Elizabeth May. You got to do it like in a drunk tone because, well, we know. But it's so crazy. And again, we have shown numerous times before that the people shouting the loudest on environmentalism are the worst people solving this crisis. Like the fact that we're resorting to Bill Gates and, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Al Gore and Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, all these nefarious people that do the exact opposite of what you imagine a true environmentalist, a true patriot of nature would do. The fact that they're doing the exact opposite, and yet you were supposed to be scolded and told that we have to admire them for their work of environmentalism is absurd. It's crazy. And it's starting to make mainstream attention. So here, this is Jasmine Lane pointed this out. She does great work. I highly recommend checking her out. She says, watch as CTV's Vassy Kapelos starts to understand the green net zero grift in real time. Keep pushing, Vassy, you'll get there. So this is a mainstream commentator who does for CTV, mainstream outlet, and even she's starting to question the narratives of this net zero agenda, which no real mainstream outlet will even touch because you've been told, you've been scorned, you've been pushed into falling into line that this is somehow working for the environment, which is not exactly true. And this is not an argument of whether or not climate change exists. It's an argument of who's actually doing better work for the environment. And I can tell you for a fact that a central banker with private jets traveling from place to place, that they're bulldozing the Amazon rainforest to conduct their next climate change agenda, they are not the answers. They are not the answers. But watch how Vassy Kapelos has a talk with Danielle Smith about this, and she's going to start questioning this narrative.
To pledge barrels. And right now the answer is no, because there's an emissions cap, there's net zero power regs, there's a greenwashing regulation that might put them in jail for talking about their emissions reductions. And so that's why it's a package.
The pitch, though, for example, in exchange for that pipeline is carbon sequestration. And this idea that the federal government is now using, that you've employed this term decarbonized oil. Like, yes, that reduces or even eliminates carbon in the processing of it. It doesn't on the other end of things, right? When oil gets used, there is still carbon. Like, essentially, if all this stuff that you're asking for goes away, there is no more emissions reduction plan.
So She made a statement there that you're still going to have emissions no matter what. That if you're putting these policies onto, the energy sector in Alberta and these companies that are drilling it and excavating the oil, that even still, people that are going to use the oil, that they're going to be driving trucks or cars or whatnot, they're still going to be bringing emissions into the atmosphere. And carbon is not, a harmful gas. Like I said, we're carbon-based life forms. We need carbon to survive. Trees need carbon to produce oxygen. And the fact that no one mentions about, the obvious things that we could be doing, i.e. planting more trees, allowing farmers to grow more crops. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about hemp, using hemp as an alternative, because hemp could easily be grown in a matter of weeks compared to a tree, and can go into everything from making paper and clothing to using for biodiesel. You look at the miracles that innovate from hemp materials, and it's pretty remarkable. But none of that ever gets addressed. But you have to be demonized and told that you have to buy an electric vehicle that may or may not work in this climate, that Alberta is bad, and Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party that have different motorcades and private jets and do the opposite of doing good for the planet and doing good for the environment. There's the supposed heroes. So she makes a great point there. Let's play that again.
To pledge barrels. And right now the answer is no, because there's an emissions cap, there's net zero power regs, there's a greenwashing regulation that might put them in jail for talking about their emissions reductions. And so that's why it's a package.
The pitch, though, for example, in exchange for that pipeline is carbon sequestration. And this idea that the federal government is now using, that you've employed this term, decarbonized oil. Like, yes, that reduces or even eliminates carbon in the processing of it. It doesn't on the other end of things, right? When oil gets used, there is still carbon. Like, essentially, if all this stuff that you're asking for goes away, there is no more emissions reduction plan.
Well, I would tell you that one of the things that I think may not be well understood, and we're trying to make sure it is well understood, is that there's 6,000 products that come from a barrel of oil. And our heavy oil in particular, in a lot of refining circumstances, it goes to make asphalt. So if you have 60% of the product going to make asphalt, that is a non-combustion use. So if you have a decarbonized product and you're using it for non-combustion purposes, it really is just a construction material, a building material. We've funded 16 different projects to look for bitumen beyond combustion, for carbon nanofiber, for the potential for development of batteries and various other uses. And so I would say that is the way the industry is going, is how do we reduce emissions, not how do we reduce production. And I think that the history of this industry has demonstrated that they are very, very good at finding new uses for their product, and I have every expectation they're going to in the future as well.
And I do take that point, but I can't find a single scientist who says decarbonized oil is anything but a fantasy. Like, is this something you and the Prime Minister have invented to justify a total retreat on climate?
Well, I think it's a three-part approach. One is you capture the emissions at source and bury them underground to either store them or use them for enhanced oil recovery. And quite frankly, we've been doing this for decades. That is not new technology. That is something that that is well established.
But at this scale, it's very new.
Well, 40 megatons of CO2 have been captured by the project in Weyburn in Saskatchewan using captured CO2 from a coal plant. So it's been going on for some time.
But
so
the
yeah, it can be
Pathways
done at
project
scale.
would be much bigger.
So it's kind of interesting that the mainstream commentator from CTV is even kind of schooling Daniel Smith on this. That it does, like, the whole idea of carbon capture and reducing the emissions when you know that emissions are going to happen. Like, that is just the part of the industry. That is part of, and even she said there that it's not just, oil for gasoline for, gas guzzling cars. Oil is used in production. Oil is used in, asphalt to build roadways and construction and so on. And that also creates emissions. And we have ways to actually reduce CO2. Again, CO2 is necessary for life on Earth. NASA did a study. They did a report recently. I wish we had it with this segment here. But NASA did a report that says right now, as people are screaming about we're in a climate catastrophe and emergency, that the Earth is actually greening. That more CO2 in the atmosphere is feeding vegetation and plants and agriculture. And things are more greener and lusher on the planet than ever before. So this idea that we're spending all this money for carbon capture technology, like they make it sound like some big innovation. Oh, we're, creating these monstrous, big, giant capture devices to capture all the CO2. It's amazing. It's innovating. And yet, since the dawning of life on this earth, we've had trees, we had plants that already take the capture of, take carbon and capture it and produce oxygen. What are these devices going to do? They're going to suck the CO2, but they're not going to provide oxygen. They're not going to provide air that's necessary for us to breathe. So this net zero agenda is just a scam. It's an absolute scam. And it's amazing that Vassy Kapelos is finally catching on to this. That, wait a second, you're saying this, Mark Carney's saying this, you're saying that you want to reduce the emissions of bringing the oil out of the ground in production, but yet people that still use oil are still going to emit CO2. And that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. How are you going to reduce emissions from production, but there's still going to be emissions on the use of the oil? So, again, the whole thing is it's one big scam. And like I said, this is not a debate on whether or not you believe in climate change or not. This is about all the initiatives that are being enforced on us, this EV mandate and, not using a gas-powered lawnmower and being told where to fly and having this, device to track your carbon usage. It's not helpful to the planet. It's not helpful to the environment. It's not for nature. It's actually against nature. That this is about control. And people are starting to wake up to this. And people should be aware that someone like Mark Carney is using this for devious purposes, that he has no intention to actually be a role model for the climate and for the environment here in Canada. And here's proof of it. This is from Wide Awake Media, where there is captured audio. This is a leaked audio recording of ex-central banker and newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney openly admitting that net zero is about making a lot of money. That is openly stating that this is a business venture of his. It's not about the planet. It's not about nature. It's not about living organisms or your future or your kids' future. It's a moneymaker. And if you watch the latest Michael Moore documentary about, the green slush funds and how businesses are being co-opted to the billionaire class that are pledging their environmental allegiance, it exposes how these people are taking advantage of this as a business venture. And Mark Carney's no different. He's used the net zero gimmick for years when he was under Brookfield. And now here he is going to tell you in a leaked audio recording that he's using this against you for his own private business ventures.
We're going to manage to net zero by 2050. Actually, we're going to have specific targets by 2025 and 2030, so you can measure the short term. They don't say this quite as loudly, but what they're also saying and thinking, and we're going to make a lot of money off of this, because actually this is the way the world's headed. I mean, I'm not sure exactly when we get there, but to be carbon competitive is going to be value creating.
So there he just admitted that. He just admitted that this is how the world's going to operate because we're in control and we're making money off it. He didn't say anything about, nature, about trees, about forests, about, polar bears. Remember they like to show the pictures of the polar bears on melting ice caps to get you kind of, ramped up about it. He's not talking about any of that. But he says that, we got to be carbon competitive. That's how we get carbon competitive with other countries. That we diminish our energy sector. That we diminish an entire province for not being in accordance to this. That we defy against Canadians' interest in building more pipelines. So we can transfer our own natural resources to more and more Canadians. And I know people will think, well, these pipelines burst periodically. And what about oil spills? What about this? And I get that. Because that was something, I was concerned about back in the day. But obviously, we're not going to get off of fossil fuels. Obviously, we're not going to get off of oil. That's physically impossible because we know that oil is used in a multitude of different products, not just gasoline, not just energy, but even just regular, consumer goods. And what is more dangerous? Having a pipeline going from province to province that we can maintain and try to keep up to date, or getting the oil from foreign nations that is going to be traveled through cargo ships across oceans that then we put into docks, transport that onto tanker trucks, and then have the tanker trucks go across the country to deliver that resource. What do you think is more environmentally, impactful and dangerous? Because I like to say the, exporting or the importing from foreign nations seems a lot worse than using our natural resource to build upon Canadians and share that to each and every province so that we have a proper, strong national energy sector. Makes a lot of sense when you really break it down. But this net zero gimmick is just complete nonsense. And he admits there in the leaked audio, it's all about money. It's all about control. It's all about money. It's all about exploiting people on a problem that he doesn't even care about. A lot of these, big billionaire types that claim to be about the environment, they could not care less. Bill Gates, I've never seen outdoors in nature. I've never seen Al Gore taking a hike or, exploring the wilderness. I take more advice about, the environment from Bear Grylls than I do anyone in legislative government. Because they actually connect with nature. They actually understand the natural order of things. Whereas these clowns, these schmucks, are doing it intentionally for the business opportunity that it holds. And that's what this is. Net zero is a scheme to capitalize and steal from Canadians and from the Canadian economy to their own personal wealth.